Middle East and Singapore. But my passion has been in higher education, and as Richa mentioned, in 2007 I got involved with building Ashoka from ground up, which finally opened in 2014. And I also had the privilege of being the founding pro-vice chancellor there. And now I'm involved with a group of people to help build Plaksha, which is more reimagining technology education. That is coming up in Chandigarh, and we will take our first class next year. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Vineet. And for our second panelist, we have Ms. Kanchi Khanna, and she's again been associated with multiple private universities in India, including Ashoka, and she's now leading the admissions and outreach for Kriya University. So a little bit, if you can tell us about yourself, Kanchi. Thank you.
Hi, Richa. Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. And it's an honor to share the platform with Vineet, who's been in many ways my mentor. I started my journey in the higher education space about 6 years back when I joined Ashoka and I was introduced to liberal education. And that's when I really realized how passionate and how excited I was about it. And I hope I've transferred that excitement to a lot of people that I met. Before that, I was a communications designer and also an art teacher for over a decade. So, working in this space in outreach has really brought together all my skills. And it's been a very exciting journey. And I'm very happy to talk to you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanchi. What I find so interesting about both our panelists and even about myself, so all three panelists, is the fact that our backgrounds are interdisciplinary to start with, right? So Vineet is an engineer who's widely working in education, an engineer and an entrepreneur who's working in education now. And you, Kanchi, have been working in art and communication and now in education. And my training was in economics and then business, and I've been working in counseling and education and training for a long time. So all of us headed towards education from different directions, but it's one of the themes that we are going to showcase in today's webinar, which is about multidisciplinary education. So quickly, I'll tell you how this whole thing will go. So we are going to be talking first with Vineet, and Vineet will sort of share with you the ideas of what is multidisciplinary education in India and some of the multidisciplinary courses. So sort of decoding this whole idea of multidisciplinary education, in a country where we were all thinking computer engineering and mechanical engineering or economics honors for such a long time. Those were the three courses that everyone was headed towards. And now we are talking multidisciplinary. So what does it really mean? How do I understand it? And how do I relate to it? So Vineet will talk about that. And you can then ask him questions as well. Vineet has to leave for an important meeting by about 5:20, 5:30. So, but he might be still able to take a few questions. We also have with us Naini from Plaksha University. Hi, Naini. Perhaps I can briefly introduce you to everybody as well, because you'll be answering a lot of their questions. I'm quite sure of that. So there she is. So Naini also leads outreach and admissions at Plaksha University, and she can answer some of the questions on Plaksha even after Vineet leaves. And then we'll have myself and Kanchi give you a little presentation, and then we'll open it to questions so all of you can answer questions as it goes along, right? So without wasting too much time, because I know Vineet is on a schedule, Vineet, over to you. Tell us about interdisciplinary courses in education.
Well, thank you, Richa. I'll just put up the presentation. So Plaksha, as I mentioned, is a new university that is going to come up and open its campus next year. Although we've started a program for high school students that runs actually out of the Pathways campus in Gurgaon. We've done 3 editions of that. We've also started a master's program. And the idea to set up Plaksha is really to reimagine technology education. And why? The first industrial revolution really around mechanization, when steam was discovered, power was discovered. The second, when production went on to scale, and I think the most common example of that is when the Ford assembly line sort of came up and cars were produced in mass. The third one really around the chip and what IT, electronics, automation did. And the fourth, which we are currently going through, around cyber physical systems Every device that you experience, every experience you have with technology today has a cyber piece to it and a physical piece to it. You know, if you climb into an elevator today in any good hotel, the elevator is connected to the cloud. It has a machine where it has to stop, what sequence it follows. So there is a cyber piece to it. And of course, it's a machine. There's a physical part to it. All cars today, driverless cars, more so, which are going to be the norm few years from now. Again, connected to the cloud, have a physical part to it, have a cyber piece to it. And the question really, what will come next? And I personally believe the fifth industrial revolution really may be about cyber, physical, and bio. All of these three systems coming together in a very interesting manner. Bio, they say, maybe the physics of the 21st century. What are careers going to be about? You know, as some of these students go to college and graduate, what are the 3-4 things to keep in mind in developing competencies? I believe that opportunity and careers in the 21st century are going to be about solving big problems, whether clean energy, cybersecurity, I've just put some of them here, accessible healthcare, future of mobility, clean water, climate change. Second, I think data and digital will rule. So anybody who's in school or parents, if there's one thing you would like your children to focus on, or even students, if you have comfort with the data, and if you have comfort with the digital world, a lot of your job is done, right? Data science, computing, etc., are going to dominate. I think everybody knows that. But what will also dominate is key skills that have been fundamental from times immemorial and will continue to be valuable: ability to analyze, ability to think critically, connect the dots, read and write well. If you can read and write well, again, majority of your career gets defined by how do you read and write. Being empathetic. What can humans do better than machines? Leadership will demand understanding humanity as it does. And to solve the big problems of society, we have to understand society better. So connecting technology, humanities, and the social sciences. It's been happening, I think, right from the time I went to college. I remember we used to do some courses in humanities and some courses in social sciences. But I don't think that's the way the future of technology education is. Rather than adding on some humanities and technology courses and social science courses to your engineering degree, courses fundamentally have to reinvent and become interdisciplinary. And lastly, I think fourth, what is also, I think this is for everybody who's been working, it's more often that attitude determines your altitude in life. Grit, determination, perseverance, really ability to rise up from failures, the ability to collaborate. Often academia and college has been about knowledge. That's most of 20th century education. Towards the end of 20th century, early 21st century, skills started to come in, especially in India. The focus on reading, writing, critical thinking. It was somewhere assumed that students will pick these up as they go through curriculum. And now I think there is a need for attitude also to come center stage into academia. There's a lot of research that suggests that things like grit, determination can be built in. There is training to be able to do that. I do think that college education in the future is going to be a lot about that. So I think really the question to ask, can we solve for 21st century challenges with the 20th century curriculum? At Plaksha, which is really anchored around technology, we are imagining our courses in 4 buckets. Each degree, each program that we envisage will have, of course, an interdisciplinary engineering curriculum, and which means that the boundaries of electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, computer science have to collapse. Now imagine a mechanical engineer trying to deal with cyber physical systems, or an electrical engineer trying to deal with it, or a computer scientist. The systems actually demand that you have to know all 3, right? The construction industry is changing rapidly. What materials to use? there is a lot of programming software coming into building design. So computing in some sense is becoming fundamental. The second one, integrating the liberal arts, design, and entrepreneurship into curriculum. Having a curriculum that's hands-on, encourages students to build machines, build stuff before they graduate, and then a strong focus on self and leadership. This is really coming from the mindset that I spoke of. Inculcating the right mindset, whether it's the growth mindset, the entrepreneurial mindset, ethical mindset. So Plaksha, for example, is starting these 4 degrees next year, and you will see that they are all extremely interdisciplinary. The first one, not so much so, computer science and artificial intelligence, which is a modern version of computer science. It has elements of machine learning, natural intelligence, human-computer interfaces, and NLP. The second, which I regard as most interdisciplinary, robotics and cyber physical systems, really bringing the cyber and physical world together. This is absolutely contemporary. This is designed for the 4th industrial revolution. The third one, biological systems engineering, perhaps designed for the 5th industrial revolution, which is yet to come. Combining biology, physics, computing, and engineering, right? It cannot be more interdisciplinary than this in the world of engineering. Quantitative and systems biology, fundamentals of modeling, analysis of large data sets, what should medical devices look like, how do you support healthcare, telemedicine, synthetic biology, which can pretty much re-engineer organisms. And the last, equally for people interested in business and economics, combining that with data science and computing. Computer science, the digital world is transforming businesses. And today, I don't think an economics degree or a business degree is complete without understanding data, without understanding computer science. So that's sort of what Plaksha looks like. We encourage you to look at Plaksha. You can go to the Plaksha website. Neni is here to answer more questions. But I also want to quickly shift gears and come to Ashoka, which is the other institution I'm deeply proud of, which I've been associated with. And I think more than any business I've built, really helping build Ashoka has been a key defining part of my life. And what is a liberal education? Ashoka really brought this to the fore. So the freedom to choose what you want to study. Most school students I interact today are confused, and rightly so, because they have multiple interests. Do you want to do math? Do you want to do economics? Do you want to do history, philosophy? So, and you would like to explore some of these more than what you've done in school to be able to choose. And you may want to blend a few, right? And Ashoka really brought that notion in and encourages that. It's the study of natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities together. Now, I do have a view that professional education cannot be kept away. And I think the future of liberal education is headed in a manner where things like technology, medicine, everything will also come in. Interdisciplinary in its very nature. It allows breadth and depth. So explore, graduate in 1 degree, whether economics, history, but also explore the breadth. So that's the broad notion of a liberal education. Contrary to popular opinion, it's not an education in arts or fine arts or dance or music, but a broad-based liberal arts and sciences education is really the freedom to explore, extremely interdisciplinary and allowing both depth and breadth. What makes Ashoka unique? Explore, learn from the best, outstanding faculty, look beyond rote learning, world-class education made affordable, very liberal on scholarships. What is less known about Ashoka is 25% of our students are on scholarship, another 25% on full scholarship, and another 25 to 30% on varying degrees of scholarship. It's more than about your grades, diverse and vibrant student body. And India's best Ashoka is not owned by one person, one individual. There are 150 donors. A lot of organizations have come together and built Ashoka. And really it puts you, this rounded education really lays the foundation of a student becoming a leader. And the curriculum has foundation courses, majors and minors, co-curriculars. And then we have an optional 4th year. It's a 3-year degree. Hopefully it'll change after this new education policy. And I should very proudly say the new education policy is following what Ashoka decided to do in 2014. The foundation courses, as you can see, which every student is required to do: Indian civilization, principles of science, quantitative thinking, literature, environmental studies, economics, mind and behavior, which is a philosophy course, great books. So they are across the breadth of disciplines. This is the breadth I was speaking of. And then students can choose to major and minor. There are lots of pure majors, interdisciplinary majors, minors. Students can choose whatever combinations they want. And all this comes with a very, very strong focus on reading, writing, discussion, debate, research, and really, in some sense, developing students with an ethical mindset, students who are committed to making the world a better place, students who are committed to invest, who really fall in love with learning, and students who come with a wide perspective that this world needs, but also the depth of their individual majors. So I'll stop here. I think I took more time than I thought. I can take some questions for the next 5 minutes, and after that, as Richa said, I may have to leave.
So, Vineet, thanks for that. So, a couple of questions, actually, one very interesting question that somebody's asked, which is about, which I'm sure, it spans across Plaksha and Ashoka. The question is that how does the university plan to curate and nurture startups that students take up in colleges? So, US universities seem to have this little entrepreneurship cell, where there's a lot of mentoring to write business plans and reach out to funders, etc. Are these universities geared for this?
Absolutely. If you see the Plaksha mission, it's actually 3 key pillars which I didn't present because of lack of time: reimagining engineering education, inculcating entrepreneurship, and dealing with big problems. Those are the 3 strong pillars. Both institutions have been founded by entrepreneurs. The Plaksha has already started in its master's an entrepreneur support program. Out of our master's class of 59 students, 11 decided to become entrepreneurs. It is now not only supporting entrepreneurs, it will set up a seed fund also to fund startups. Our effort is going to be compounded in the space of bioengineering, which we feel is the future. Ashoka has run a center for entrepreneurship pretty much right from the time it started. Almost 12% of the Ashoka class have chosen to become entrepreneurs. Some outstanding success stories. So that's been Ashoka was the first liberal arts institution anywhere in the world to start a center for entrepreneurship. Traditionally, it's been the domain of business schools and engineering schools. So heavy focus in some sense.
That's great. So, Vineet, I find it very fascinating that you're talking about a seed fund that the university would actually, I don't think there's such a thing in India at all. And that's really very, very exciting for students to hear. The idea of bioengineering being the future also sets my mind rolling in a number of areas. One very interesting question someone's asked here, Siddharth has asked, which is that Plaksha is still in a formative stage. Do we have a timeline for the infrastructure to be prepared? What is its ability to draw funding as it builds itself up? I guess people are worried that it's not yet completely there. How much can we depend on its following the trajectory it's projecting?
So, if you were to visit land in Chandigarh airport and take a 5-minute detour, the Plaksha campus is right there, close to the Indian School of Business. It's coming up, it's under construction. And if some of you were to visit it, you will see the construction is very, very advanced. We still have 1 year to go. We've done that earlier at Ashoka. We have no doubt in our mind. We actually have closed funding for phase 1 of Plaksha. We are now raising money for the phase 1 of Plaksha is 240 crore. We've already raised 310. So Plaksha is now raising money for the second phase, which actually starts in 2023. So the funding, the campus, faculty recruitment, already faculty have been recruited. Some more recruitment is happening. So be rest assured that Plaksha is pretty much on timeline to open its doors next year.
Which is a lot given the disruption of the pandemic, I would say, that's something that shakes up a lot of things. And I'm sure that all universities are struggling with that. It's great that Plaksha is still on time to, launch its first batch next year. There's a very good question that Mudit has asked. The last question we need before then you can, maybe join us from the car later if you can. The question is, since Plaksha is a new university, how does it plan to give the equal or more amount of research opportunities and availability? Will the lab be able to match the global standards that universities all over the globe provide?
Right. It's a great question. And I would say absolutely yes. right when Plaksha opens, we are building a makerspace. I think the like of that makerspace, at least I have not seen in India. I've seen many of those across Stanford, Berkeley, MIT, but not in India yet. That makerspace opens right in year one. The day the year students come in, our computing facility opens right in year one. Some of the bio labs open right in the beginning. And of course, then as years go by, those labs expand. I should also mention about Chandigarh, the special thing is Chandigarh probably has what is little known. Chandigarh has the finest educational research infrastructure in India. Institutions like IMTech, NIPER, ISER, these are top research institutions within 10 minutes in the vicinity of Plaksha, right? And the Indian School of Business, and we have extensive relationships with each of them. And that was one reason to co-locate in Chandigarh. We do want to harness that infrastructure as well, and we are building those partnerships. So I do feel undergraduate students get into research probably by third year, fourth year, but Plaksha in some sense is even going to be ready if people want to start to do that in year one.
That's actually fascinating to hear. I don't think I've heard of that sort of a maker space outside of US universities where, there's such exciting spaces for you to speak about. So it's really like bringing the best of international education into India. So Vineet, we'll relieve you now. I know you have to move. If you can join us from the car and answer a few questions, that will be fine.
Thank you, Richa, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Vineet. Thanks, Bob. Okay, so Vineet is gone, but we do have Naini here from Plaksha in case you still want to ask questions about Plaksha, and I'm sure Kanchi will be able to answer some of those as well. So I'm now going to, okay, all right. So, before actually we move on with our lineup and start sharing with you the material that we have and answering your questions, I want to get some answers from you. So I want to understand that among our audience here, how many of you are really looking at India education? So I've just set up a very small poll, which I'm just launching right now. So you can see the poll and take a minute or so to answer the poll that how high is India in your priorities as a study destination? Is it number one, that's top priority? Is it number 2 or 3, or is it a backup option for you? And nobody feel bad, so just say what it is. Okay, so I'm ending the poll now in 30 seconds, 20 seconds. So when it goes to 1 minute, I'll end the poll. So if you're still thinking, then take your time to respond. Right, so 80% of you have voted. I'm ending the poll now, so we'll be able to see the results. There they are. So you can see that you have, more than 60% of the people are looking at India as a top priority. And then, many of you are looking at it as a number 2 or 3, and some of you are looking at it as a backup option. Of course, we don't know what the future is going to bring, and therefore we don't know how high up it will go in your priorities. But thank you for that. Right, so wonderful. So what we're going to do now is that I'll run you through a short presentation about the new age careers and your ability to prepare for it. So last webinar that we had, I did run everyone through a presentation on careers of the future, and I'll very briefly summarize that. I've added some elements this time about post-COVID careers, because, I've been doing research on that. I've written a book called The Ultimate Guide to 21st Century Careers, and I'm working on my second book, which is post-COVID careers. So sort of post-pandemic is a nicer sounding thing. So post-pandemic careers, right? So based on that, I put together some ideas of what is coming up, what's new that's coming up that people can be excited and create a vision around, right? So we'll do that, and we'll answer a few questions, and then Kanchi, we'll move to you for your piece and more questions there. So give me a minute, I'll just share my presentation. Here it is. Okay, right? So those of you who would have attended the presentation last time would be familiar with this, where we've just sort of put together what are the major shakers and movers of our world today, which is number one, of course, digitization. We can see that everything is online, online is everything, and this will remain. So even after the pandemic opens, we don't expect that this is going to go away. Then you have the whole idea of artificial intelligence, as Vineet also pointed out, as everybody is aware that there's no running away from this. There's no running away from thinking things across the world, whether it is gadgets, whether it is our phones, you know, what they can think and preempt for us. Then there is automation and robotics, and as you're aware, robots are expected to be in every aspect of our life, and probably sooner rather than later, because the pandemic has sort of accelerated the move towards technology. Then the idea of blockchain, which frankly in India we are not so exposed to, because India has not opened itself to cryptocurrencies, but blockchain opens a whole new way of doing business, both in terms of raising funds, in terms of creating legal contracts between people, and a lot of new products and new businesses can be launched around blockchain. Then you have the idea of climate change, as Vineet also pointed out, which is really about the fact that we need to invest in energy, and that it's a crisis that everybody's investing in solving, and that's something that will remain a very big move. Genetic editing, he talked about bioengineering in a fascinating way being the future really, and genetic editing is actually a very small part of it. It should really say bioengineering. Globalization then, which has now sort of, it's been put a break on because of this pandemic, that everybody's huddled in their own countries, but online and digitally we all connecting with people all over the world. We are working in cross-country teams all across, and you know, people are working with service providers across countries. So that's one very big factor that's going to impact things. Population, the fact that, you know, older people are healthier, they are willing to do more, they're willing to take leadership. Heads of states can be older. You know, a lot of people are starting second careers at 50 and beyond. So there's a whole population that's coming up, and that impacts a lot of things, both in terms of what we can do in our lives and what we can offer as services to people. And finally, technology. We don't even know what all is possible with technology, and like it or not, you know, love it or hate it, we are going to see a lot of it coming all over into our lives. So I say, let's not hate it, let's love it, and let's see what technology has to offer, right? So those are really all the factors that would be impacting careers today. And these are some of the careers that we talked about last time, being some of the top careers to look at in the world to come. Right, so psychology, a lot of areas within psychology, a lot of areas within design, because when things change really fast, the idea of someone being able to design something that is for the new world, design something for people of today's world is very, very, is precious, and therefore is highly rewarded. Scientific research, of course, as you can already see, so much more investment in scientific research. You can see that on the healthcare front, but there's also huge amounts of investment in scientific research, in food technology, you know, to feed so many people. And that too now with the pandemic, there's a question mark on how exactly do you do that? Do you get more machinery to do it, etc. Nanotechnology, energy, sources of energy, space research, which again, a slight break has been put on it because of the pandemic, but space hotels and space travel is still being prepared for. There are companies that are still preparing for space tourism, space fashion, space food for space, space architecture. There's so much going on over there, right? The development sector, of course, ours is a much more compassionate world than it was earlier. Perhaps it's a privilege of the riches and luxuries of the 21st century that we can be more compassionate, and therefore there is a lot of funding for social sector companies across different areas. You need to specialize in an area for you to really be able to leverage this, these opportunities that are coming up. Engineering, like we spoke about earlier, and Vineet spoke about as well. Healthcare, that's a no-brainer. Of course, we know that healthcare is, in any case, an evergreen industry. It's, however, how does it really come? How is it impacted both by the change and by the pandemic? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Fitness, wellness, therapy. As you can see, there's a huge surge towards fitness and wellness and towards therapy. There's less stigma. Now with the whole thing happening in Bollywood, there's so much conversation about mental illness and mental fitness all around, that's another huge area that's coming up and probably would become less unstructured. Right now it's very unorganized. Anyone can almost do anything, but it's probably likely to be structured into better courses. What we are doing as health science now is probably, health and fitness science is probably going to be structured further, and those specialists will have many more opportunities than they have today. Computer technology, again, a no-brainer. Art and entertainment, as you can see, in the worst of times, what we want to do is sit and watch Netflix, right? So we need people to produce Netflix, right? So we really need people who can entertain us in many different ways so that we can, live through this unpredictable and harsh world and be excited and have fun. And that would, again, never go out of style. Then you have education. As you can see, education is an industry that's been admirable in this entire pandemic by not stopping and just moving on and reinventing itself on the ball, reinventing itself on the job. And so much new stuff is going on in education today that education really offers some huge opportunities for people, both as entrepreneurs, as trainers, as instructional designers, as teachers, as administrators, as marketing people, as communication people. It's a huge industry that people can reach out to. Deal makers, of course, would again never go out of style. People who are strategists really and who help create strategy. And finally, that very exciting looking bulb is for entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs across the world, across different areas like space, technology, etc. Now, I'll just take 2 more minutes to change this and show it to you now as what is the impact of the pandemic on each of these areas. And in each of these areas, what are some new things coming up post-pandemic that my research and talking to people shows, right? With psychology, I think, of course, personal therapy and emotional skilling is very important. But a big area that's coming up is human-AI interaction, right? So one expects that there would be robotic caregivers, both in terms of caregivers for, let's say, people who have dementia or people who are just suffering from old age related illnesses. There are already AI-based machines and robotic machines that are working in elementary education. So we need psychologists to be able to create human-safe robots, human-safe interactions with technology and machinery. And that's one new and very exciting area that's coming up in psychology. With design, we expect that there would be a revamp of the home space as well as the office space. Work from home is here to stay. One doesn't expect that the next year is not going to be a lot about work from home. And people are already saying, oh, I can save so much on office infrastructure. I can save so much on real estate cost by letting people work from home. So the idea of that work from home office just allows people to move out of cities, to move into suburbs, to move into smaller cities. And therefore you need people to be able to design the entire interaction, design an interaction that is going to be able to design living spaces and workspaces, the home office, to be able to design a living space where you can both entertain as well as have your privacy, co-living spaces, co-working spaces and co-living spaces getting combined. And plus with smart gadgets and Internet of Things coming now, you do expect that a lot of the home spaces and office spaces will get completely redesigned. So interior design and architecture is something that's really expected to take off post the pandemic, right? Now, work from home, personal styling. So in design, of course, there's so much else one can talk about when it comes to user experience design and web design, but we'll talk about when we talk about technology. But right now we're talking also about fashion. And just the whole thing, work from home opens a whole new way of looking at who you are, presenting yourself. There's a lot of focus on personal branding, because now you just that one person behind the camera in a video call, and how are you really presenting yourself? What are you wearing? How do you look? So that personal styling and a whole new range of design is something that is also expected to grow. In scientific research, of course, vaccines, of course, that's a place where a lot of investment is going, but robotic intelligence, that how does robotic intelligence be useful and safe at the same time? What are the borders of that when it comes to law and ethics? A lot of research in that area, a lot of research in energy, as we talked about, in bioengineering, as we talked about earlier. within the development sector, now you've got everybody is into fundraising, raising funds for small street performers. Someone is raising funds for tailors. People are raising funds for various things. And there's a lot of funds available in the market also. Despite everything, people's generosity has been on show and a lot of liquidity is around there. So that's one big area in the development sector that one can really grow. And how do you really engineer fundraising towards a particular cause? Then reskilling, because so many people need to be reskilled. Migrant laborers need to be reskilled. There's so much reskilling that the government is going to be investing in, and there's so much reskilling that is needed across adults as well as younger people. So that's an area where a lot of investment is expected. And food and agriculture, as always, is going to be one area where a lot of funds would be available from multilateral agencies as well as NGOs. Then engineering, this has been talked about to death, automation, robotics, but really multidisciplinary engineering is going to be of huge value in the post-pandemic world, because you don't just need people who can create a design without really being able to understand the human elements behind it. You want someone who's able to empathize with the people, who's able to project what people want, someone who can bring some emotional intelligence, some cultural intelligence, some imagination about the future, some futuristics into it. So you're really looking for engineers who are both multidisciplinary and entrepreneurial. People who can take a risk, who can run with something, who can build a story. Not just somebody who can present technology, but someone who can really create a story and make a story come to life. Healthcare then, it's also expected to see a churn, because, and already you can see that contactless care has become important for people to not only provide care on video calls, but also to train technology to provide care. So a lot of doctors are no longer even doing direct patient care, but they're doing a lot of research, setting up AI, analyzing data. Huge amounts of data is available on people's health to build intelligence to create more services and medicines that are more effective with different populations. Then robotic care and surgery, of course, a lot of research within healthcare. So a lot of doctors are moving into research rather than into direct patient care now. Fitness wellness therapy, we spoke about that earlier. Computer technology, again, there's so many areas: cloud computing, AI and machine learning, blockchain, cybersecurity, gaming. Like I told you earlier, UX design, which is interface design, which becomes so important now because everything is online. Everybody's buying everything online. Education is online. Interactions are online. Working is online. So interface design is a very, very, very big area. And it overlaps between design and computer science. So if you are headed towards being a designer, then it's a great idea for you to really learn some technology and explore the world of interface design. Because today, even a new fashion startup is looking at how its online interface looks. How do you reach people by having an easy, exciting interface? So that interface becomes really important, even in media and art and entertainment. What's the interface of Netflix? Is that better than the interface of Apple TV? So how do you design an interface which is ready for the new world? Art and entertainment, like I said, remote content. This is not even, it's really, really at a very, very beginning level. The slope is very steep of building content remotely across different locations. And again, there's a lot that can be done with remote content, with remote media, with webinars, with just people doing debates across remote locations. There's so much, not the Arnab type of remote locations debate, but more ordinary people like you and me connecting on remote locations media. There's so much that can be done with that is being spoken about. A lot of personal planners within art and entertainment, which is, I've sort of clubbed that with the idea of travel and tourism, like bespoke holidays, bespoke weddings, customized events for yourself and for, small bubble groups and families. There's a lot that can be done around that. Education, again, there's a lot of investment in education, and that's expected to grow. So it's not just about being a school teacher today. If you look at what's happening with Byju's, for example, Byju's recently invested bought over a huge company, a small company, actually a startup that was teaching coding in India. And if you look at it, what that company really did differently is to create an instructional design that allowed coders to teach people across different locations, and they quickly ramped it up. And Byju's invested a huge amount of money in it, and it just opens your eyes to the fact that there is a lot of potential in just designing instruction and education and courses for the online world, for allowing people to reach out. So a lot of demand for instructional designers, for personal coaches and personal tutors, even for coaching, tutoring and training people who are adults and who are reskilling, because so many people need to reskill. They need to plan, what do I need to do? How do I make sure that I finish the skill? So there's a lot of potential within education in the post-pandemic world as well. Then strategists, as we talked about earlier, cyber lawyers, but also a lot of continuity and risk handlers. So, people who can create a strategy to handle the kind of risk that the pandemic has created, and not to imagine what can be, because we don't know what can be, but to create an organization that can handle different types of risk. Digital marketers, clearly, someone who can reach people online. And then data literacy, people who can create strategy based on data. There's so much data lying in the world today, and people now are really using the pandemic to unearth that data and to read it and to say, what does it say and how can I build strategy around the data? And finally, again, coming back to entrepreneurs. So what does the pandemic mean for entrepreneurship? So it's actually a world that's really rewarding the agile entrepreneur, someone who can, really a gig entrepreneur who's saying, let me do one project here, let me do this, let me build my skills, let me try this. Okay, let me customize this for you. Okay, this is not working, let me try something new. So the freelance gig entrepreneur is somebody who's got wings in this pandemic, really. Home-based business entrepreneurs, a lot of women who were stuck earlier with balancing home and work, now have the wings to be able to do so much because everything is online. And the other thing, big thing in entrepreneurship is blockchain-based businesses, because blockchain is really here to stay now with the pandemic. So I just wanted to give you that view of the sort of options that the pandemic has created and is really giving wings to in the world today. So I've not been looking to see if there are any comments or questions, but I'll just do that now. Okay. All right. Okay, wonderful. So that's just a sort of an overview about some of the career options available to you. If you look at that screen, you'll find that almost all career options are out there. So really everything is possible for you. You really have to just find what's your area and then be agile and customized to the world around. All right, so that's just my little spiel before I hand over to Kanchi. And Kanchi again is going to look at the whole perspective that we've been talking about from university's point of view, particularly from Kriya. She's worked with Ashoka as well as Kriya, as well as she's close to the Plaksha management, so she can give you a really well-rounded view about the world of liberal arts education. Over to you, Kanchi.
Thank you so much, Richa. If it's okay, I'll just share my presentation. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Kanchi again, and I've been looking after communications and outreach at Kriya for the last 2 years. And, I was one of the first employees of Kriya, and we really built everything from scratch over there. And I was privy to the very first initial conversations that the founders were having. And, just to tell you what Kriya has done and why it did what it did, I'll sort of build on what Vineet took up earlier, which is the industrial revolutions. So he spoke about the 4 industrial revolutions and what the education should be for that industrial revolution. And both Richa and Vineet have touched upon it. So I'm not going to go too much in detail, but the way we saw it was that absolutely no education or no discipline needed to be studied in isolation. We had to interweave it with other disciplines and understandings from across the social sciences, the sciences, and the creative arts to be able to solve the problems that were so very complex in today's world, right? It had to be interdisciplinary. Also, it's not enough to be teaching content to students anymore, right? You have to talk about the context. Why is it what we are studying, the whys behind what we are studying and why they are relevant. And really, both of you spoke about how the world is changing so fast and how we need to keep skilling and upskilling ourselves all the time. So the ability to be a learner, somebody who is nimble, can pick up very quickly newer skills. You and me, Richa, maybe we've had 2 careers in our lifetime, but it's believed that students or the workforce of this year, this generation will have almost 6 careers to deal with. They'll have to switch that many times, and just imagine the number of jobs that they'll be doing. So they need to become learners, and that's what education should really push them to become. So another very important part of education for this time and later is recognizing biases, because information is coming from everywhere. There is so much data and there is so much information coming to us from multiple sources all the time. We have to know what really means what, and whether we should question it or not. We have to be critical. We have to think critically about all this and maybe form our own opinions and develop our own perspectives in life, right? Students also need to be able to tolerate ambiguity. Look at the world. Precisely in 6 weeks, it came to a standstill, and we were questioning everything that we've been doing for decades now. And also to be very, very, learn to become very ethical leaders. Right? So CREA really built its curriculum and its pedagogy on these understandings. And if I can just take you to the next slide before we actually come back to what it really offers in terms of degrees. So we have pioneered something which is known as interwoven learning. And interwoven learning, I would say, is a notch above interdisciplinary. So we spoke about multidisciplinary a few years back, bringing different disciplines together. Then we spoke about interdisciplinary when we were combining them together and innovating on the cusp of disciplines. But now really we are moving into interwoven, where every subject is taught by design, looking at multiple perspectives, right? So in a CREA class of a subject, sometimes a course would be taught by 5 different teachers. And they're not surprised if in their maths class there's an ethics course that comes in. So while students in liberal education do pick up interdisciplinary majors and minors and bring them together, very few universities are actually bringing that interdisciplinarity by design into the classrooms, right? So whether you're doing a physics at CREA or you're doing a history course at CREA, your course will have all these elements that you can see on the screen. It will be writing intensive, because we want them to become very good communicators, right? Not just communicating to other people in their own discipline, but also communicating to people who don't understand their discipline. Research is a big part of whatever we do at CREA. In fact, one of the very few universities who don't give research grants only to their senior faculty, but also to the very young faculty in their university. And it's being driven very passionately by Kiran Majumdar-Shaw herself. Right? So it's interdisciplinary, definitely, and ethics, data analytics, and historicity is something that is introduced initially, but will keep coming back into your classes again and again. Right? So all concepts are introduced, reintroduced, affirmed, reaffirmed over the 3 years that you be there, so that when you leave the portals of the university, you are a very mature learner or a very mature thinker, right? And also comfort with uncertainty, really knowing what are the questions that no one has been able to answer. But just the fact that they've never been able to answer doesn't mean that this generation might not come up with those answers. So it's important that they engage in those conversations, right? So when they come in, they have 35 courses to graduate. The first year is mandatory. Everyone does the same courses, and I'll come to those. And the next year, they start choosing their majors and minors. For the next 3 to 4 months, they can still change. I don't know where that line appeared from, but yeah, they have that flexibility. Besides their majors, they have about 8 courses which they can take up across disciplines, across wherever they want to. So they have the choice of doing a pure major, a joint major, which is a combination of 2 subjects, an integrated major, which is a combination of 3 subjects, and then 3 disciplines, and then a minor. And if you don't do a complete minor, you can do just a concentration. So there's so many options and so much flexibility there for them to choose. The first year they do their required courses, and after that they go in for a internship, which is towards a social sector kind of an internship, a development sector internship. And we really want them to do that because one of the major aim of Kriya is to make them very socially, environmentally conscious leaders, and to be ethical in whatever they do, right? So the first year, when they've just done their foundation courses, they haven't picked up their majors, we want them to do such an internship so that they start picking up those values and skills, right? It's only after the second year that they do an internship, which is more in line with the major that they're doing. So again, very similar to the other liberal arts universities, the first year is spent in really, very broad-based learning, where they do courses from across the sciences, social sciences, humanities, and also the creative arts. They also get introduced to skills which are very relevant, to which Richa, you spoke about, like computer science, data analytics, design thinking, communication, and all that. And these will, of course, keep coming back into the classes later. So currently, these are the list of subjects that Kriya offers you to do your majors and minors in. And of course, we are a new university and we are adding more and more disciplines to it. We hope to be converting the business studies minor also into a major in the coming years. And of course, there will be more that we'll keep adding over the years. Right? So just, keeping in mind what the kind of learning that happens at Kriya, we are also very particular about what kind of student really comes into Kriya. And it's a very holistic admissions process where we look at how they engage with ideas, how they define problems, how they think about them, how they agree to disagree. So there's an element of them engaging with us individually and then also as groups, right? Because collaboration is something that we really hold close to our hearts. So we are looking for people who are good communicators, who are collaborative, who are open-minded, who are curious, and who are, people with a lot of integrity and character. So I can touch upon this more later, but I don't want to spend too much time on the admissions process. If there's a question, I'll definitely take that up later. We have a fee which is close to about 8.25 lakhs a year, but we have a very strong financial aid offering and generous scholarships which students can apply for if they are made an offer of admissions by us. I'm going to stop there. If there are any questions, Richa, I'll be happy to take them. I'll just stop sharing.
Thanks a lot, Kanchi. Thank you so much. Now, of course, there are a lot of questions that parents have asked, which we'll come to in just a little while. But if I can ask you a sort of a broader question from students, which is to say, how does a student in grade 10, let's say, or grade 11 prepare themselves for liberal arts universities like Ashoka, Kriya, or Plaksha? Like, when students are gearing towards the US, then parents have this view that my child should do a social work project, my child should do this, my child should do that. So they're trying to deconstruct it. And, we Indians are very good at formalizing things and say, okay, this is
yeah.
Is it a formula?
In these few years that I've been with both these universities, Richa, and there may have been some changes at Ashoka now, but the basic philosophy will never change. We are looking for people who go beyond their school curriculum, right? If you look at the applications that they make for the overseas universities, those universities have very little opportunity to really engage with the applicants. So what they write in the application is more or less what they are evaluated at, right? But for universities like Ashoka, Kriya, and other liberal arts universities in India, they have the time and do make the effort to actually meet with each and every applicant and discuss and really try to understand the student well. And I'm sure Plaksha will do the same. So we meet them, we have multiple engagements with them, we observe them, and we spend a lot of time and effort on understanding each student and their background, what they bring to the table, because any liberal institution will want students who will come and contribute to a class, right? So to be able to bring in students who will fit in very well is important. While for a foreign university, you may, check box and say, I've done this project, I've done something towards volunteer, I've done something. It may not be very great an idea if you haven't actually engaged deeply in that for these kind of universities, because we'll have a one-on-one conversation with you. We'll spend 4 to 5 hours with you. And most of the times when the student has just done it because for the sake of putting it on the CV, we get to know. So don't do that. Be yourself. Use the last 4 years if you're high school, and I'm clubbing 9th to 12th like the NEP together. Use that to really explore interests, and by now you would have finally find out what it interests you. So instead of trying to put everything into your profile, pick up 1 or 2 very strong areas that you are interested in and really deep dive into them. So even if it's dance, even if it's Bharatanatyam, make sure that you study the history of Bharatanatyam. Make sure that you know who are the exponents and people who are very good at Bharatanatyam. Study their history, study their things, so that you can have an engaging conversation in your interviews about it. And not just, it's not just a line item in your profile saying, okay, I have done Bharatanatyam for the last 10 years. But be prepared to have conversations about whatever you've done. So spend the 4 years fruitfully, I would say, actually doing stuff and not just trying to put it on paper.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kanchi. So what you're really saying is that there's no algorithm as such that you can, create, but you just need to be an interesting person with some depth in the area, that interesting and authentic person where you have some depth where you can talk about.
And also these universities know, look at the diversity, Richa, in India. There are students from state boards, there are students from semi-urban areas, from smaller towns. So you can't compare somebody who's from one of the top schools in Delhi to somebody who's maybe applying from Varanasi or Vizag, or they may not have got those opportunities to explore these. So we can't compare apples and oranges. We have to see the context of the student, really understand that, and then see, did he make full use of the opportunities that he did get? Did he push himself? I think that's more important for us, to see that ability.
So a lot of questions have been asked in the meanwhile, and I'm going to pose them.
Sure.
So one says that what are campus undergrad placements like at CREA? Now, has CREA batch already passed out?
No. So CREA, the undergraduate batch hasn't passed. Our MBA school has had 18 years of students passing out and being placed. So we have a placement cell. We also have a career development cell now for the undergrads. They've picked up projects and internships all across the world, but it's just the first batch. So it'll be some time before we can boast of our placements.
Right. But what I hear is that there is a placement process,
yes,
certainly. And all the universities, all the new age private universities like an Ashoka, CREA or Plaksha, pay a lot of attention, and I'm sure Naini will support that about Plaksha, that they pay a lot of attention towards placements, because they understand that education, while it's fantastic to deepen your education, it's also meant for you to be able to engage with the world, right?
So Richa, we are, unfortunately, India is so used to subsidized education, and the public institutions, that they believe that is what, it costs to study in international universities, but it doesn't. Getting the kind of faculty that these universities has is a huge cost. The kind of experience that they're offering comes at a cost, right? So people have to. So whenever they are, and I completely empathize with parents, because I am one myself, that what is the ROI if they're spending, say, 8 lakhs a year or 30 lakhs for a BSc or a BA honors degree? Are they going to be placed? So all the more reason why we emphasize so much on the skill building part, right? So that we are making them future ready, we are making them ready as a workforce, and not just not just engaging with ideas in an academic way, but also a skill building towards a job, right? And we've seen that they do get very high level kind of jobs and not back end jobs when they move out from here.
Absolutely. And I've also seen that students coming out of liberal arts universities, like this, also very high self-esteem. So they also push for the, more interesting jobs. They push for jobs with more responsibility and more growth prospects. And then it sort of becomes a virtuous cycle. Right. So there's one more question over here from Jaspreet Kanchi. It says, what is a capstone thesis?
Okay. So it's an honors degree, Jaspreet, and which means that you have to submit that project as a part of your 3-year degree, right? So students will take that up. And this capstone thesis is not an individual thesis necessarily. They can take it up in a group of 2 or 3 also. And it could be, at, like I said, an overlap of the subjects that the 2 or 3 people have, or even if it's individual, it can be an overlap of sorts. And it's only when they move into the 4th year that they do a senior thesis. If they stay back and for the 4th year, which is not mandatory, they do a senior thesis. So research, like I said, is a very important and integral part of Kriya. All the classes will push them to do research, to write papers. Very few exams will be exams as such. It will be mostly assignments. It will be project work, and sometimes live projects which faculty members may be associated with, which students will do. So we will be pushing them to do a lot of research while they are there.
Great. Thank you so much. And that's, again, a little different from what our undergraduate education was like. It was pretty much about taking papers and answering papers and looking at past papers and preparing them. Even that's a skill, though, I must say. It's not as if it's the easiest.
I think you depended more on the photostat chap than your teacher to give you those notes.
You didn't just crack the exam either, even then you get bad grades with all the kunjis that you had, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have another interesting question from Shweta here, which is that how will the NEP affect or change the curriculum? Will it affect or change the curriculum? It says, how will it change the curriculum, the admissions process, and the undergraduate program in general across all these 3 universities? So you have a view on this.
I think Vineet answered that question, Richa. I don't think, I think the NEP is following what universities like Ashoka, Kriya and Blaksha are putting in place, have already decided to put in place. And it gave us goosebumps to see that everything that was written there was already something that we were implementing at our university. So we don't need to really change. Our programs were very futuristic to start with.
Thanks so much, Kanchi, for that. So there's a question over here from Janvi, which I'll try and give a shot to first and do share your thoughts also, Kanchi, on it. She says, what are the opportunities after doing a BA in political science other than the education sector? So I'm assuming here you're talking about a non-liberal arts setup where you are only sort of graduating in political science without another minor degree with you. So, students who studied political science can, of course, teach it or, get into instructional design in the education sector. But then there's all of media and journalism. And if you see all your leading television channels and magazines, they would have a lot of people who would either have a political science or history or English background. So that's one whole area that's open for you. Then, there's all of corporate communications, right? So, in fact, why do I say just corporate communications? If you look at an MBA, a master's in business administration, it doesn't have any stipulation of the kind of undergrad course that you can do. So you can pretty much study political science and then get into business, and you can graduate in, let's say, a non-technical kind of thing, which doesn't require too many math skills, for example, a marketing or a human resources, which does require some math skills, but it's not like a finance or a operations, which needs specialized training. So you can do an MBA and get into those business aspects. You can get into an entrepreneurial sort of setup over here. You could really get into, of course, research and academics. Kanchi, do you have any more thoughts on what somebody like this could do?
So, whether it's political science or any of the other social sciences, I think what we really train students to be is researchers. So they are really appreciated for their research skills, whether it's for the internet, writing content on internet, whether it's doing market research for corporations. There are also fantastic careers there for them, right? And they don't all necessarily have to go into the political space after doing political science. They could even go in for the civil services, right? That's also something which is very lucrative for students who do this.
And another fantastic option is the social sector, right? Think tanks and the social sector, where you can be working in either research or in implementing social programs across states or across countries, and you can get into multilateral organizations, you can get into NGOs. So there's all of international relations. So international relations is another specialization that you can look at after political science. So there are really tons of opportunities, and of course there's writing and publication, so you can always get onto that aspect of it as well.
And Richa, you did touch upon this, but we'll have to know that students who would come out of Kriya doing political science would have done another minor or other subjects, and has studied so many other skills and subjects, disciplines, that they are really much more than just a political science graduate. So there are so many other careers that will open up for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kanchi. Shubha, you have a question here saying, what are the placement opportunities available after liberal arts undergrad from Kriya? So I do think Kanchi answered that to some extent. The specific types of opportunities, I'll just park that for a while and we'll come up with that in just a little while. There's a question here from Vikrant, which says, what are the opportunities after BA, BSc at Kriya to go to the US for graduate studies, given that it's a 3-year program? So I think there are two parts to that question. It's asked, this 3-year program thing is saying that the US often requires 16 years of education. And so how does that play out? And just, I guess, that what are the tie-ups that you may have with international universities that makes it easier?
So we do have a 4th year, which is not mandatory. Students will get, according to UGC, we are supposed to give out a BA, BSc degree after 3 years. So after 3 years, they would have completed their graduation. But if they want, they can stay back for the 4th year. The 4th year will be a postgraduate diploma or a certificate program, which will allow them to either deep dive more into whatever they've specialized, or take up another subject, or if they've taken up a minor in their first 3 years, they can convert that into another major. And this also acts like adds up to the 16 years that is required to go abroad. That being one part, we have a lot of faculty members who are from the US universities, if US is particularly what you want to ask about. And they do have connects over there. They do have projects running over there, which our students are becoming a part of, right? One of our students is now doing at the Harris, at the Harris Public Policy School at Chicago. She's doing a project. So they will move on and create resumes which are very strong, and which will be like a pathway to going abroad if they want to. And why just the US, right? We've got tie-ups with James Cook University in Australia. We've got tie-ups in European universities, in American universities, be it Stanford or Chicago or Berkeley. So those tie-ups are already there for students to do their maybe summer or semester abroad. But we also have another very important tie-up, which is with the Academic Internship Council. This is a council which I think Kriya is the only Indian university till now to have a tie-up with. They offer internships across 20 countries in the world. So don't be surprised if you can pick up an internship in Brazil or any part of the world. And most of the Ivy Leagues subscribe to it. And so if you have all this on your CVs, it's going to be a very smooth walking into the better higher ed universities abroad. And of course, recommendations from faculty who double up there. In fact, our vice chancellor has been the president of Middlebury for I don't know how many 20 odd years. So they're all working at multiple places, and they can bring in those opportunities for our children.
That's very interesting to hear. Middlebury is a leading private liberal arts college in the US. And that's a sample, as she's telling you, because you have the best of faculty across the world in all of these universities, not just And therefore you have those connects, you have that intelligence, and therefore that just makes it easier for you to make that step if you want to look at postgraduate abroad. Okay, so
Nanny, would you like to add something? We're not letting Nanny say anything.
please do add both to this and to the placement aspects as well.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, thank you for having me here. So Kanchi has covered most of the points. Even Plaksha will have a lot of emphasis on placement cell, given that we are looking at interdisciplinary tech education, which will be very, very experiential. So students will be learning a lot of skills during their education at Plaksha. And a major part of our semester, students will be going through a grand challenge module wherein they will be working on industry level projects with the industry, very, very well tied up, so that once they are out on the other end, they are very well skilled beforehand. In fact, our Tech Leaders Fellowship program, which Vineet already mentioned about, 60 of the students, most of them are now placed. Some of them wants to go abroad to study, and the other few want to pick up their own entrepreneurship projects. So it kind of opens up more choices, I think, rather than being worried about what do you want to, if you will get a job or not, to be direct in that manner.
Nanny, what about this exchange semester sort of thing? People have been asking that, is there some sort of an exchange program with universities abroad? Is there such a thing already in place at Plaksha, or is it part of the plan?
Yeah, so Plaksha already has in partnership with UC Berkeley, Purdue University, and Stanford Research. So these partnerships are all institution-wide partnerships, not just on paper. So they are helping us build a curriculum from scratch, get the best of the best faculty, while the exchange programs are in pipeline. That won't be a problem at all.
Wonderful, thanks.
Richa, is it okay if I answer one of the questions on the chat box? That's from Ananya.
Yes.
So Ananya, you'll be happy to know Kriya is in a place called Sri City, where we have we have a forest right next to the campus. We have mountains and trekking and hiking trails. We have the Pulicat Lake, which gets beautiful flamingos and migratory birds. So if you're a nature lover, you'll love to be at Kriya, and we have ample and more opportunities to do all these activities. And within the campus itself, we have beautiful water bodies.
That sounds so beautiful.
It is.
That sounds amazing, actually. So that question was about, is there an availability of programs like NCC and exposure towards mountaineering treks? I think there's also a lot of emphasis on sports on all of these campuses, with some very good activities available there. So, is there anything that you want to add? For those of you who came in late, and I also didn't give Nanny much of a chance to introduce herself earlier, she does lead the YTS program for Plaksha University, which is the Young Technology Scholars Program in Gurgaon. Nanny, if you can just give a little bit of an idea about what you do, and just any thoughts that you've had with all this discussion about university.
Yeah, just one more thing that I wanted to answer, since I've been a liberal arts student myself. I've done post-graduation from Ashoka University, and I just feel choices have increased. They have just not decreased after studying there, because of the education that I got, which was very much experiential in nature. We had an experiential learning module where we were just working directly with the company. So that is one from more of my personal experience. On my background, yes, for Plaksha, I've been part of the team since the very start, since we just started with the vision 3 years back. I joined in 2018. We had launched a summer school program called the Young Technology Scholars Program. It's a 2-week summer program just to give an early exposure to students in the tech education space, which is again something that students do not get in the school, and they do not get an exposure of what engineering education really is, which is much more problem solving oriented and experiential. So I have been leading that bit, and also now managing outreach at Plaksha. Yeah.
So Neni, there's one question which I think all of us can take a shot at, which is from Shubha saying, what are the placement opportunities available after liberal arts undergrad, say from Kriya? So I don't think she's particularly asking about Kriya. She's saying after liberal arts education, what are the kinds of opportunities that students can really look at? So, you know, I believe it depends partly on what area did you major in. So if you major in, let's say, a tech-based area, like both Plaksha, Kriya, and Ashoka offer computer science-based degrees. Plaksha particularly offers engineering. Then, you know, all tech-based opportunities are open to you, including startups and opportunities over there. But even if you are graduating in non-tech-based areas from, let's say, Ashoka or from Kriya, you would have opportunities in startups. A lot of them would get employed with consulting firms. There are a lot of big business banks and financial institutions that go there. There are a lot of social sector companies that are going to go there. There's a lot of education companies that are going there. Perhaps Neni, you and Kanchi later, if you can also share a little bit about the kind of placement opportunities you expect students to have.
I think Kanchi will give a much better answer on this, given that she has been involved since the very start with Ashoka and now Kriya. But more from the other end, and just, you know, now being part of Plaksha, from its more from you know, from the very start of how an institution is built. While I've seen my friends at Ashoka going to different places, from public policy, as you already mentioned, to places like an institution building where I am currently, law, just handloom industry, you name it, and you will find someone or the other, the consulting firms, the top consulting firms for that matter, because the whole point is to understand the current landscape, which is, it doesn't require someone to just have one very skill, but an interdisciplinary skill, which wasn't given a focus otherwise. I have seen education from different perspectives, from Delhi University, then I've been a Teach for India fellow as well, seen it from the grassroots level, and now being on the other end of institution building. I just strongly feel a need of skills that are very, very interdisciplinary, communications, while having tech skills, which, and it really depends on the kind of industry that you want to go into. Education was one very close to my heart, and that is why I chose to come this side. But yeah, Kanchi, I think you will be a great person to go back
No,
to.
I don't know. It's a difficult one to answer because we really don't know what jobs are in store for us in the next 10 years. We don't know what careers, right? I was a designer, and then suddenly everything got computerized, and I was at the age of 40 and I didn't know what to do, right? So I had to fall back on my communication skills. So the skills that liberal education will teach you are the skills that will last with you for your entire lifetime. And the way things are moving, the way we have to you know, quickly upskill ourselves, we need a revolution in skilling, right? And whatever we learn today will become irrelevant 3 years down the line. So does it really matter the what, but really how you learn and how you develop as an individual? So these kind of universities and these kind of courses are developing you as an individual, rather than just adding to your knowledge base, right? Or information to your repository. So learning for me is a trajectory which can be divided into 3 parts. You know, it's the information, it's the knowledge, and then it's the wisdom that comes from it. Information is all over, it's everywhere. If we have the correct thinking skills, the critical thinking skills, and, you know, the ability to recognize biases, like I said, we will create knowledge, and we'll create knowledge within the university systems if we allow our students to question, to ask, and to develop their own opinions and perspectives. And once that is done, they will become wiser. And who in the you know, employer space doesn't want a mature, wise person as their employee? So yeah, you know, if you got all that knowledge and wisdom with you when you approach employers and recruiters, they are going to see all that in you. I know that for the last 6-7 years, I've been recruiting people, and I've hardly looked at their degrees. I just look at the person the way they are and what they are going to bring to me. If I started looking at degrees, I wouldn't have hired half the people that I did. But it's only who they are and what they've become as individuals that companies are looking for. I think some of the top companies in the world have stopped looking at degrees. They're looking at you and what kind of a person you are. Earlier, these top companies wouldn't even hire from the two-tier universities. Now they are going to state board they are going to state universities to hire, because they know talent can be anywhere, right? So you have to build yourself up in this. I think, and I'll just leave you with an example of my son. He did a similar course to what Plaksha is offering. He did his engineering degree from a liberal university, where he majored in computer science, minored in economics, and took few courses in political science. And he got picked up by Goldman Sachs because of his understanding of the economic sector, and also because he was a coder, right? So he's in the tech team of a finance company because he had both understandings. So you realize even the jobs are so complex these days. They don't want a pure tech coder who will never understand their business model. So the more interdisciplinary understandings you bring, the better jobs you'll get. That's what I really mean. Sorry, it's a long answer. I hope I made sense. But
very insightful answer, Kanchi. Thanks for that. We have one last question, which I think amongst all of us, only you can answer, which is that what is the difference between getting a liberal arts degree from government universities and private universities? All yours.
Yeah. So, when we started with Ashoka, we would say, we are pioneering, or we are the first liberal arts university. We said that with so much confidence, Richa, because the way liberal was being defined earlier, the universities were not really true to the meaning of liberal, where you really opened up your curriculum, where you allowed people to become who they wanted to become rather than bucketing them. So many public universities did offer, and there was PDPU, which actually is one of the oldest one, which was offering liberal education, but they weren't really as liberal as Ashoka began to be. And then, of course, now we have so many. We have Flame was an institute at that time. So these people have really embraced the liberal pedagogy, which is opening up all their curriculum, saying you're a science student, you want to study creative arts with it, fine. And places like Kriya are offering the entire spectrum, from the pure sciences to social sciences to humanities and the creative arts. So the students have such a wide spectrum to choose from. But public universities at best are doing multidisciplinary. They still haven't reached the stage of interdisciplinary, leave alone interwoven, right? They are still at the initial stage of, you're doing engineering, you're at IIT, you can take few courses in economics. There is no coming together of the two disciplines. So that's what really is required to actually integrate those into learnings. Absolutely. And not just be multidisciplinary.
And what I'll add to that is that, there are like Delhi University as a humanities and social sciences bachelor's course, which is very good, but it is very humanities focused. So, this thing of stepping across STEM and humanities is something that currently I've only seen with Ashoka and Kriya, and now with Plaksha offering the data analytics and, economics course. So that's not a very common thing. But it really depends on what you're looking at. And if we understand what you're looking at, then one can look and create your top 10 colleges. There may be universities in the public space that are useful for you as well. One is not saying that they're not. Delhi University still offers some excellent education to all the students. All right. So that's it. I hope I've been able to answer everybody's questions. And I think we've really had a wonderful time. I've learned so much. Thank you so much, Kanchi, for being with us. Questions so patiently and in so much depth, and thanks so much, Naini, for coming in and giving your perspective here as well. That's a thank you from some of the participants, and I'm sure everybody's really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you very much. We'll be sharing a recording with everybody as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Richa, for having us.
Thanks to everyone, and thank you, Teji, for joining. Teji is a dear friend. She's the counselor at Mumbai, and I can see her part of the audience.
Thank you, Teji, for joining. Thanks a lot. She's a great